What was it like the first time you died? Imagine sitting around a campfire where someone asked you that. Before you can process the thought, someone brings up the time they were looting a treasure chest, only to be surprised by a mimic and subsequently eaten. Someone else mentions being torn limb from limb and complains about the itchiness in his leg when it was reattached to his body. Another person reminisces when their lungs filled with water and they sunk to the bottom of the lake. Silence falls over the campfire as everyone looks at you to hear how you died. And you actually have an answer. Being swallowed by a dragon, sacrificing yourself so your friends can survive another day. As you watched them run away, you felt yourself slipping down into the dragon's stomach, consciousness slowly fading as the dragon's stomach begins its digestion process. Just some light conversation. The usual inside the dungeon when sitting around an open fire. This talk happened after the rest of the party had just revived you from the dragon's belly. Everybody was celebrating and chattering, planning the trip back to the surface now that you're safe. That is until the sovereign of the dungeon walks into the campsite, the Mad Mage. The party is given little time to react before a hole forms below them. They fall in and are sealed. Not only are they buried alive, but the walls of their new tomb start to close in. They push against the walls in a vain attempt to stop being squished. They are all about to die, not dying like they had before. This death was different. They are about to suffer the same fate they saved you from. True death. True death is weird and mostly unique to Delicious in Dungeon, bar a few exceptions. For most anime, dying is true death. A person dies to leave the story. Simple. But for an anime like Delicious in Dungeon, where death is by no means the end of a person, it gives me this strange, morbid feeling I haven't felt in anime before. This feeling of always being so close to death, yet also being far off in distance at the same time. I'm going to spend the next 22 minutes and 22 seconds explaining this feeling to you. Sit down by the fire and rest, as I ask you, what even is death? Okay, so sorry to cut into the video here, but I'm going to be talking about a lack of being alive a lot in this video. With the number of times it comes up in the script, it would be weird trying to dance around it the whole time. And from what I know, YouTube doesn't like the discussion of reverse living, so if you like this video, I ask that you share it around with your friends to help spread the word, or else you'll suffer the fate of a life switcheroony. Okay, I'll stop now, back to the video. So, that first question, what is death? Death is when something is living, stops living. It's kind of hard to define it beyond that. Instead, I can describe how death feels, like how it feels to view death, not like kind of what it feels to die. I imagine it would be pretty hard to capture, so like we can ask the corpse how to ask them how they felt. That death means quite a few different things. Death is brutal, fast, loud, exciting, inspiring, scary. The most bombastic display a story could offer is someone dying, like a whole city getting wiped out when Cell enters Dragon Ball Z. But it's also quiet, slow, sad, shocking, wasteful, permanent, temporary. The most hard-hitting moments in any story are when someone dies, such as Colonel Hughes being shot by his own wife in Fullmetal Alchemist. You might be caught off guard with temporary being in that list. So let me explain with my first example, Dragon Ball Z. It is perhaps the most iconic thing to ever exist, paid to the show's characters, fight scenes, its world, and owing no small part to the show's mascot, the Dragon Balls. The whole series is centered around these 7 balls that can only be collected once every year, granting the person that found them one wish, anything they could ever want: infinite wealth, immortality, panties, and bringing someone back to life. It's this singular wish is what makes Dragon Balls the series work the way it does. Because of these balls from a dragon, death in Dragon Ball can be wasteful, exciting, brutal, sad, shocking, and temporary. Since at the end of the year, the gang can get the balls back together and revive whoever died. There are limits, of course. You can only bring back the same person once, and someone who died of natural causes cannot be brought back, among other criteria. These quote-unquote rules get worked around and circumnavigated in many ways throughout the series. But this is to say that dying is a temporary state in DBZ. Death leaves as quickly as it arrives. A lot of the excitement is made from the system. Moments like Goku getting killed in the first few episodes of Z is only possible because of the balls. The rules are there though, and sometimes there's no workaround, like the time when Android 16 is killed. To Goku and the rest, who have been up to this point functionally immortal, the loss of the life of someone who cannot be wished back fully breaks them. The grim reminder of mortality, and that someone can take it away so brutally, becomes the catalyst to one of the greatest moments of all of anime. This system of revival is almost entirely unique to Dragon Ball somehow, despite how much of its DNA can be found in most anime going forward. The way it makes death, for lack of a better word, easy in its world, seems almost completely at odds with how most people treat death. Hard and simple and sacred. It's important to note where the system came from, because Dragon Ball wasn't always about bombastic battles where everyone can die. It started off as a light-hearted adventure manga, where a century-old hermit sexually harasses a 14-year-old. It was, for kids. The Dragon Balls were these magical artifacts that granted the person who collected them anything. It was the silly adventures of the monkey-tailed Son Goku, traveling the world to become the goodest martial artist there was. When the Dragon Balls were eventually found, it was for a pair of women's panties. As a result of this, the Dragon Balls are simple. You collect all 7 of his balls and get to ask the almighty Shenron for a single wish. It's not until the start of Z that the balls get as complicated as we know them today. Then we start getting all these rules about death and how many times it can be used and yada yada. During this transition, that the threat of death becomes a much more real possibility. I mean, it starts off as a light-hearted comedy about a group of oddballs having an adventure. You wouldn't want the specter of death looming over the whole time, would you? Delicious in Dungeon starts with the main character's sister being swallowed whole by a dragon. Then we get to go on a light-hearted comedy about a group of oddballs having an adventure. An adventure about getting back to the sister as fast as possible before the dragon digests her. Not to worry though, because Phelan, the sister, can be resurrected with only a small fee. But if she is fully digested before the party gets to her, then there is no hope of a revival. Knowing all of this, somehow the main party are all relaxed about this whole ordeal. Why? Within the dungeon of the Mad Mage, if you come from the outside, you cannot die on the inside. This one rule governs over everything in this dungeon. Therefore, there is an ecosystem in the dungeon to accompany this. People called corpse retrievers, who search the dungeon floors, bringing back any dead people they find back up to the surface. At the top, they get revived using magic and pay a small fee for the service. Then the revived adventurer dives back into the dungeon. There's all this little loop of death. However, there are rules to follow for this to work. 1. You must be human or a human-adjacent creature, e.g. dwarf, elf, halfling, tall man. 2. If your corpse can't be found, then you're poop out of luck, buddy. 3. Your body was destroyed in such a way that there's simply nothing left to revive. If you don't tick any of these boxes, then you have nothing to worry about. So, let's have a test. You see a bunch of dead bodies floating face down in a lake. Is this cause for panic? No, you say. Of course not. The bodies are still intact, they are among the human variety, and lastly, you found them. Congratulations, both you, Leos, and Chilchuck passed the test. All that's left to do is leave the bodies in an obvious place so someone else can save them. Take the barley while you're at it too, but they're not gonna need it no more anyway. That's just how death is in the dungeon. Brutal, exciting, shocking, fast, and temporary. Death is just another overhead cost for an adventurer that can be paid in time and money. Even something simple like escorting someone. If the situation calls for it, you may well get shot in the head and die being used as a human shield. Owing to situations like this, there's this Wild West feeling to the dungeon. A vertical Oregon trail going down to who knows where. Only the bare minimum amount of infrastructure is made for everyone racing into the dungeon. Hastily made markets and inns, operated by people trying to wring every last piece of gold out of the adventurers. One day, when the money is gone and people leave, the dungeon will need little time to reclaim everything the humans built. Everything here is temporary, as is death. Yet, the further distance between you and this flimsy settlement, the closer you are to death being permanent. There are only a few people who are strong or experienced enough to reach the lower floors of the dungeon. These people don't usually become corpse retrievers either. Some do, but they take time in between descents. Time spent with your body decomposing. It is more and more likely you will get found by some monster, and your soul separating from your body. I've feigned to mention it up to this point, but there's a specific element that makes survival possible in the dungeon: your soul. Normally, death is normal in the outside world. Your body dies, and your soul separates from the body. But in the dungeon, the soul doesn't separate after death. It stays linked to your corpse, only disconnecting when the body or soul are destroyed. Being eaten by a dragon would typically mean your body is destroyed. But luckily for the elves in the party, dragons sleep a lot. And if the dragon's sleeping, that means they're conserving energy and not digesting their food. So even if the last memory he has of his sister is her hanging out of a dragon's mouth, who cares? They are going to get where the dragon rests, slice open its belly, save Phelan, and all live happily ever after. During the beginning section of the adventure, it never really feels like anything bad is going to happen. No matter how much the dungeon screams danger, it feels kind of limp, not until we get to the end, of course, where the specter of death finally catches up to us, and things start to go back to normal. Normal like other shows. Like One Piece! The many things One Piece does differently to other anime does not include how it handles death. Death is pretty straightforward in One Piece, as in when someone dies, it's usually permanent. It means a lot of things. Take Goldie Roger, for example. Knelt on an execution platform, about to be killed off for the crime of being the king of the pirates. Before his head gets lopped off, he gets asked a question. Where did he keep his treasure? He responds with, This single sentence spawns the great age of pirates in One Piece. It's hard to describe the gravity of that to someone who hasn't seen the show. Just imagine the Pirates of the Caribbean, but like, everywhere. It is even harder to overstate the importance of death this one man holds. And it's not just Roger's death. Whenever someone dies in One Piece, it is given the same respect and gravitas. Every single one is so memorable and etched into the vast world of One Piece. I could probably even tell you the name of every character that's died in the series. They're just that memorable. I'm only being a little hyperbolic there, but it's to show just how important death is in this world. Bar one unique case, there is no system of revival in One Piece. No Dragon Balls, no Dungeon of the Bad Mage, but people still come back, whether we want them to or not. Bear with me as I explain the ending to one of One Piece's major arcs. If you don't want spoilers for chapters 101 to 217, then skip to the next chapter. The Kingdom of Alabaster is engulfed in the final battle of a civil war. Perhaps half the nation's citizens are fighting in the kingdom's capital city, and there is a nuke in the middle of the city that will go off in 5 minutes. This is a disaster situation the Straw Hat Pirates find themselves in. Their bodies worn and ragged from fighting before this, the pirates scramble to find where the bomb is, and the top of the clock tower is where they find it, the most central and highest point in the city. And go figure. With only 1 minute left on the ticking time bomb, panic sets in as the group tries to find any way to prevent the explosion. The Birdman named Pell flies into the clock tower and calmly tells the pirates that he can take the bomb out of the city. He has helped the pirates before this. He offers to take the bomb himself and fly it out of the city, where he will be the only person to die. With just seconds left on the clock, they are left with no choice but to accept this solution. Pell then flies the bomb into the sky. With tears in his eyes, he recounts how much he loves the people in the city below him. Eventually, the bomb goes off, and the plan succeeds with only Pell dying in the explosion. This is death in One Piece. Shocking, exciting, sad, inspiring, temporary. Temporary because Pell just comes back 20 chapters later. Like, okay, you know all that build-up I gave you about how cool of a death he had? His noble sacrifice saving the whole kingdom? What if I told you that was his whole character? That's like his thing in One Piece. Then it just gets reversed for no reason. It's not like anyone was asking for his return. He's just a bodyguard to way more interesting characters. Like, what's the point of anyone dying then? Even when we see them get a tomahawk locked straight through the colon, can they just come back with a few band-aids? And even that. But why though? I ask myself. Why do I care so much about the death of this one character? Because they broke the rules. This is the first time this has happened in One Piece. Up until now, we were to believe that death was permanent. That's the power death is normally meant to hold. I feel this way about this bird guy coming back because of how he died. It creates a kind of dissonance from the world. That death doesn't matter as much as it should do. Yet it's the same dissonance flipped on its head in Delicious in Dungeon that just feels so right. In One Piece, there's uncertainty that death will stay permanent. In Delicious in Dungeon, The uncertainty is if death will stay temporary. Why is death temporary, and why only in the dungeon? Because outside the dungeon, death is normal. Your body dies and your soul leaves your body. And yes, the soul is very real in this world. That is a reason for near immortality in the dungeon, because the soul stays with the body after death. It stays anchored to the corpse, not being able to leave until either it returns to its body, its anchor is destroyed, the anchor being the body of course, or even if a different soul enters without permission. The last option is the most chilling to me, because what most likely entered your body, it was another person who had the same thing happen to them, repeating the cycle. Death is a grisly subject in Delicious in Dungeon, even more so than our world, making it ever the more shocking that the main party know full well what could happen to them, but are still so happy and cheery. Every day, every hour they spend in this dungeon makes it even more likely they will suffer that fate. The same fate that will surely fall upon Phelan if the party does not reach her in time. And they do make it back to her. Unfortunately, time was not on their side, as the worst outcome has happened. Digestion, destruction of her body. After killing the dragon and slicing open its belly, all they find is a bunch of bones and hair. The fear of being faced with real death, not something that can just be paid off, puts the party in complete shock. They scramble through all the mess, trying to recover whatever they can. The hope the party had of the dragon hibernating and would have left at least a little bit more left of Phelan was only ever hope. Now they are faced with reality, so the party starts separating the monster bones from the human ones, all the while telling us little bone facts. Did you know that the wrist has the highest cluster of bones in the human body? How neat. These cool little facts are only here to distract from the human skeleton in front of us. What was supposed to be inside a loved one is now all that's left of them, and that's all Marcel the mage needs. Marcel uses forbidden magic to revive Phelan, writing a circle that taps into the same magic the mad mage used on this dungeon. It works! Phelan returns alive in her body as good as she left it, besides all the blood on her. Hurrah, we all cheer out. Death has been defeated. There is something so real to this moment I can't quite explain. Not something you can get from Dragon Ball or One Piece, because it isn't just a feeling of happiness and relief. There's other emotions, like fear. Fear that something much worse is about to happen. We know death is common and can be reversed very easily in this place. Why does it feel so wrong this time? There was a set of rules. You can revive forever only if you die under specific circumstances. Now that those rules have been broken, what other rules will be broken? Why am I starting to feel that dissonance again? This isn't the only time I've felt this when a person was brought back in an anime. There's One Piece of course, but what I mean is this fear of normality being lost. Another time when rules about death were broken, except in that anime, reviving wasn't allowed, ever. Death was permanent. The anime I'm referencing is
Fullmetal Alchemist. Fullmetal Alchemist.
There are two brothers, Edward and Alphonse Elric. They grew up in the countryside with their mom and dad. One day their dad left. He was an alchemist, someone who could turn one thing into another thing, assuming they were made from the same components, like turning coal into diamonds, for example. This is the law of equivalent exchange. When he left, the curious Elric brothers raided his study and started to learn everything they could about alchemy, turning a plank of wood into a doll, repairing broken fence posts and the like. When tragedy struck and mother died of sickness, they wanted to learn even more about alchemy. The two boys, now without both parents, only wanted one thing: bring their parents back. With their understanding of alchemy, they thought to themselves, what if we made a human body and brought Mom back to life? All the components were gathered: calcium, carbon, sulfur, water, etc. All they needed was a blueprint, their own blood to make this new body. What happens next wasn't surprising. In all of alchemy, there are only a few rules. One among them is, you should never try to bring someone back to life. The two boys would have known this, yet they attempted it anyway. They found out the reason why is because the human is worth a lot more than ingredients you can get at the grocery store. It costs Edward's left leg and right arm, and Alphonse's whole body. And what do they get in return? A shambling, charred corpse that looks nothing like their mother. It didn't even last a minute before dying again. This is death in FMA. Slow, sad, scary, wasteful, and permanent. This attempt to bring back the mother haunts the Elric brothers for the rest of their lives. They almost had everything they needed. They were missing only one ingredient, the soul. Even though Delicious in Dungeon and FMA are on complete opposite ends when it comes to death, when both anime are asked what it takes to complete a human, they both answer the soul. Yet it's inside the answers they diverge yet again. In FMA, the world is built upon science. The concept of the soul goes against the very laws of equivalent exchange, because there is no equal to the human soul. When the Elric brothers find this out, they don't react with shock or horror, just relief. Death is indifferent. The soul is static. It's either on or it's off. Trying to make the soul into something malleable is not something two young boys in their parents' basement could possibly achieve. Out of all the examples of death in other anime, there has been one constant. Revival is special. In DBZ, it happens only once a year. In One Piece, it rarely happens if ever. And in FMA, it is completely out of the question. We can all imagine what it would be like to revive once, like in these shows here. But to get resurrection over and over to the point that dying has lost all meaning, and you can control it? What would that do to a person? That's when Delicious in Dungeon asked, what if death did care? What if death was malleable? What if everyone and everything gets to decide on who dies and who lives? What are you willing to ignore for the sake of controlling your own death? This is a rhetorical question, of course, because the obvious answer is everything. The bodies floating face down in the lake, people's souls floating around looking for a being to claim as their own, the carcasses that were claimed walking around lifelessly, the deep dark dungeon that goes down endlessly into the earth, the beasts and monsters that want nothing more than to dine on your flesh, the fact there is no actual insurance that you'll always come back. And what was your reward for ignoring all these signs and diving into the very depths of the dungeon? The death of your sister, and coming face to face with the god who lent you this power. This is when we go back to the start of the video, where Leos and his party are buried alive. Right now, there are no magic balls to revive their crushed corpses, no assumption they can just come back. They're in an unreachable place, and their bodies will be destroyed. This fear that they will die for real with no hope of being saved is true death in the dungeon.